This is the CitizenLink report.
If you find our insights helpful, would you support our video efforts? $500 buys an hour of studio time. And we usually don't use a whole hour, but it covers the crew, lights, cameras, all that. That means your gift of $25 or more goes a long ways. Just click on Donate. Thanks from all of us.
Every day it seems there's a new poll. One says Obama's ahead, the next one says Romney's ahead. How is a discerning Christian to make sense of these things anyway? This is the CitizenLink report. I'm Stuart Shepard, along with our executive director, Tom Minnery. Hi, Tom.
Hello, Stuart.
I'm fighting a cold. He is not, in case you're keeping score at home. Tom, as somebody arrived in our country and did not understand how our system of government works, they would think that we decide everything by polls, because that's all the news is about, and they would decide that we cannot make up our minds about anything.
Well, that's right, and people come up to me worried, the polls show this, the polls show that. What do I believe?
Yeah.
And for people who are attuned to the election and who may be watching the polls, there are a number of things that they should be watching, and let's go through them. For one thing, you got to watch the sampling in the polls. How many of this group have they sampled? How many of that group? How many people in that group? And that plays into the results. For example, last week there was a big headline in CNN saying that President Obama was ahead 52% to Mitt Romney's 42%.
Yep.
But when you look at the polls, you see some things that are startling. They way oversampled the Democrats. They had about 50% of the sample Democrat, about 45% of the sample Republican, and only about 4.2% of the sample independents. And if there's anything that's been said about the independents this year, it is that they are not tracking with President Obama as they did in 2008. So one commentator, and analyzing this, says that CNN poll undersampled independents by 25%. Now it oversampled Democrats by 15%, oversampled Republicans by 10%, but there was a skewing, and the Washington Examiner took a look at this and said, now if you take the skewing out of that poll, Mitt Romney would actually be winning by 53% to about 45%. And that doesn't add up to 100% for some reasons, but they don't do that. And so you cannot always look under the headlines to see what group was sampled.
I'm going to ask you a couple of questions like a regular person would. Why not just not ask people whether they're Republican or Democrat and just ask them who they'd vote for?
Well, because it depends on where you would ask the question. If you ask it in a community that is predominantly liberal leaning, you'll get more Obama supporters. If you ask it in a suburban area or an outlying area, you'll get more Republican supporters. So you have to ask who they're likely to support and whether you have to know whether they're Democrat or Republican.
And the follow-on to that would be, well, why don't you just measure equal amounts of both?
Well, because equal amounts of both are not going to show up to the polls on Election Day, because there are so many people who are unaffiliated with the major political parties. Roughly it's 1/3 Democrat, 1/3 Republican, and 1/3 independent. So you've got to get your sample pretty accurate.
Now, if I were a cynical person hearing the results of the CNN poll coming right after the Democrat convention, there is an expectation among those who talk about these things on the chat shows that that there will be a bounce after a convention. So suddenly CNN has a poll that shows the bounce that they expected. It fits the storyline they trumpeted.
Well, they do, and that gets to the fact that the media is extraordinarily biased this year. Now, we've complained about that for years. The mainstream media obviously is tilted left, but this year it's amazing. I had thought that there would be lots of stories about that problem at the Democratic convention, in which they had taken God out of the platform and taken out Jerusalem as a reference to the capital of Israel. Right. We reported on that last week, but there has not been a lot of headline material about that. So that shows how the mainstream media is skewed toward the Democrats, because if the Republicans had gotten themselves in that tangle, there would have been a lot more headlines on that.
The last article I read about it belittled those who actually pointed it out. And said, well, they're just making a whole bunch out of this, and it's really nothing, and it's as if, and then on and on it went, attacking those who pointed out something that really is something we should talk about.
Well, it is. And the other thing that was in the news recently was the commentary by Mitt Romney on the Mideast conflict, and the relative lack of substantial commentary coming from the White House or the State Department. And there was an errant statement by the State Department issued through the Egyptian embassy that was denied by the White House or disowned by the White House. Now that is evidence of disarray, but the media attention was all on Mitt Romney getting into this. Mitt Romney doesn't realize that politics stops at the water's edge. Mitt Romney doesn't have any experience in these issues, so why is he speaking up? Well, of course, President Obama is not the world's most experienced guy when it comes to foreign policy either.
Yeah. Now, the headlines then are working to influence our perception of the election. One would have to, if you sit back and think about it, but does that really change what I'm going to do on election day? Does that change how I will decide who to vote for?
Well, it depends. There's some deviousness in some of this. If you can convince your opponent's followers that your opponent doesn't have a chance, you will be demoralized and may not show up, thereby lessening the chance that your opponent has. Yeah. Here's another thing that plays out a lot, and that is each media outlet trumpets its own poll results. For example, when the Wall Street Journal issues a poll, it doesn't say, according to our poll on September the 12th, President Obama is up by 3%. It says, President Obama is leading by 3%. Period. Now, they will tell you it's their poll, but they ignore the evidence to the contrary. And the thing to know is that there are lots of polls, daily polls, by this time in the election cycle. And so don't get dissuaded or falsely giddy about any single poll result, because tomorrow there will be a new set of polls. My favorite website for keeping up to date on all these polls is a website called realclearpolitics.com. Now they lay out all the recent polls, but they also do something that's not helpful. They tend to lump together the average polls, and that doesn't really help, because it doesn't matter what the polls said last week. What matters is what the polls are saying now. So it's the new poll that is the one that is predominant, and as the president's bounce from the convention slowly sinks, then Romney appears better by comparison, but you get the average of the bounce averaged in with the current polls, even though the president's sinking back to his below 50% margin. It seems like he's still ahead, and the media, if they do quote realclearpolitics.com, they tend to quote the predominance of the polls, not the newest polls.
Kind of the polling version of hang time. You're just floating there for a bit, even though it's past history.
It is. You know, there's one reliable pollster whose polls regularly appear on realclearpolitics.com. His name is Scott Rasmussen, been in the business for many, many years.
Yep.
He is not associated, as far as I know, with a major media outlet. He tends to be very accurate in his poll results, and he tends to have Governor Mitt Romney doing better than other polls have him doing. For example, currently the poll of Monday of this week, September 17th, has Mitt Romney up by 1%, but you don't hear that, not nearly as much as you heard CNN last week saying that President Obama was up by 3%.
Because that fits the storyline.
Yeah, and Scott Rasmussen has no media megaphone to amplify his voice. If you want to know Scott Rasmussen's results, you go to his website. He'll tell you a little bit. If you want to know more, you got to pay. That's his market model.
So wrapping all this up, if you were to summarize, how do we navigate through this? Do we just ignore the polls? Do we pay attention to them, but with a bit of insight? What's the best path?
Well, I think one needs to pay attention to them, but realize it's a snapshot of how a slice of the electorate believes on a single day. Tomorrow, depending on events, depending on people's growing interest in the election, that snapshot will change a bit. Overall, The race seems to be in a dead heat. I've never seen it this tight in so many battleground states. And people should pray for the outcome they desire. People should pay attention, and people should, above all, get their friends, family members, members at their church to do that most important thing, and that is cast an informed vote on Election Day.
And not just in that top of the ticket race, but also when it comes to the Senate races, to the House races, to local races in your state. It's important to pay attention to the rest of the ballot as well.
It is, and as the weeks go on, we will let people know how they can find out some of that down ballot information in their states.
All right. Tom, thank you for that insight. Very helpful. Thank you for watching. We do appreciate hearing from you. We read every note that comes in. You may always write to us at mail@citizenlink.com. And we encourage you to pray, as Tom just talked about, for all of us as we make this most important decision about the future of our country and where it's heading, based on the ideas that are represented by the folks who are running for office. Try to find those who are resonating with you. And remember, stand tall and be heard.